Bitcoin, y'all. I'm your host, Zoom Out. Here to talk to you today about why Bitcoin is arguably the best form of money that's ever existed. None of this is financial advice, and I am not a financial advisor. So let's start with a thought experiment where we're way back in history and we're living in caves. And there's a group of people living in a cave, and some of them go out hunting. Some of them go out gathering fruits or whatever types of nuts, food that they can find. And let's say that I bring back 3 rabbits and somebody else brings back 4 rabbits and somebody brings back other various sources of food. And what we do is we make markings on the wall that represent what it is that we brought, that we added in value to the society of the group of people living in the cave. And we keep track of that so that when it's time to divide up furs for clothes and food for eating and all of that, that we'll know who's owed what. Now, those markings are a ledger, and that's what money is. At its most primitive, basic form, that ledger literally is money. It's just markings that represent the wealth that's been added to society. But it's hard to keep track of that and transact with it without issuing some type of physical object that you can represent the wealth. So an example of that would be there were times where societies used shells. So now you bring back 3 rabbits, maybe that gets you 10 shells, and then you can trade those shells for some rabbit meat and some berries and nuts. And so that works great until some other travelers come in, and they've come from areas closer to the sea, and they realize that you're using shells as money, and they think, well, we know where a bunch of shells are, so next time we come through here, we're going to bring a bunch with us. And then they come and they got all these shells, and they buy all your stuff, and they leave you with all these shells, but those shells aren't worth anything because they just took all your stuff. And so that's a representation of a collapse of a monetary system. And ultimately, in that scenario, it collapsed because shells aren't scarce. They're easy to come by. They might have been scarce for this one group of people living in a cave far away from the ocean, but they're not scarce for everyone. And so as migrations occurred and people were moving around, all of a sudden shells could flood the market. So that's why gold worked so well as a representation of money, of wealth, is because it's pretty scarce. You can't just find it laying around everywhere. You usually got to dig it out. You got to mine it. You got to expend energy and time to pull it out of the ground. And then you can then in turn build a system where that scarce thing represents the wealth. And that's great. That works. But what doesn't work is that gold is heavy and bulky. And if you're trying to do a large transaction, it's not so easy to do. And so in that case, you might do what is called a layer 2 money, where you in this instance, let's issue some paper gold. So now you're going to take this person or institution, and they're going to hold the gold, and then they'll issue paper gold to represent that gold. And then you can transact with that, and that's way easier to carry around on your person. The problem with that is now you're trusting this group or this institution or this person to be truthful and to not issue more paper gold than they actually have. And so you can see huge manipulation when countries did this in the past, and they had gold reserves, and they issued paper gold on top of it, and then they need more money for whatever, funding a war or something, so they just issue more paper gold even though they don't actually have the gold underneath it, and that suppresses the price of gold. And that manipulation causes issues in the economic world. Eventually, in America, Nixon took us off the gold standard. Now, those are just examples of how different ways that money has existed and how it has, in some ways, failed. In the late 40s, early 50s, you started to see first versions of kind of credit cards. In the late 60s and early 70s, you started to see the first versions of debit cards. These were built on top of networks that computers were communicating with each other on. Eventually, in the early 80s, you had the kind of modern version of the internet was birthed, and everything eventually switched over to that. And so today, the way that our money works is that it's really debt that is issued by banks. Oftentimes is how money is created. And then there's sovereign debt, which is issued to create money to stimulate the economy or to fund, loans for corporate America. Other countries or other companies in the world too. So, but it's less scarce than gold, for sure. And so that's why you see inflation, because more and more can be created. And so there are issues with that. But what comes with debit cards, credit cards, these things, is the ability to carry around large numbers of larger amounts of money than you would have been able to with just cash, right? Because you could just swipe a card. So that's great, but let's just kind of see how that works. So you have Discover, Visa, American Express, and MasterCard. And these are really two systems. One system is a messaging system, and the other one is an underlying payment rail system. And so the money is actually transferred across a payment rail system, but there's a messaging system that works first. So if you're banking with, call it Chase Bank, and you go into a store and you want to buy something and you swipe your card, then the point of sale system that you swiped your card on gets a message from the card saying, hey, I want to spend this amount of money, call it $100. And then it sends a message to Chase Bank, says, hey, does this person have $100 in their account? And then Chase Bank sends the message back to the point of sale system, says, yeah, got $100 in his account. And so boom, receipt prints out, you walk out the store and you have your whatever you just bought, which is great. It's instantaneous. The messaging system is instantaneous. But to transfer the money from your account to the store takes a couple days. And so it's not instantaneous. The payment rail system, which the money is actually transferred on, takes a couple days, and it has to go through certain digital stops. And this payment rail system is maintained by humans in actual brick and mortar buildings. And so there's bills associated with that. And so you have to charge a fee in order to pay the people and pay the bills of the building. Now, the fees are even higher than that because it's marketing stuff. You get rewards for your use of the card. And so that's built into it too. So ultimately, it's 2.6 to 3% that if you spent $100, right, the messaging system was immediate. You walked out. 2 days later, the store doesn't receive $100. It receives, $97, call it 3%, right? So 3% along the way has gone to pay for these other things. Now, what Bitcoin has done for the first time ever is allowed you to attach an asset to the message itself. So the message that's sent, and it says to your account, which you're holding, you've self-custodied your Bitcoin. Don't worry about that. The message says, does this person have the money? Yes. And sends it across with the message, yes. And the store receives the money. And there's no human or brick and mortar place that needs to be paid or have bills paid for on that payment rail system. It's a completely decentralized network that has no employees. It just lives on the internet. It's open source protocol that lives on the internet. And so it's pretty innovative. It's a new way to transfer money, and the fees associated with it can be set at whatever you want, and it's 100% profit. So if the point of sale system says, well, we need to be paid 0.1% or 0.05% or whatever to facilitate this transaction so that we as a company are profitable, then that's 100% profit for them. And the merchant ends up with 99.9 or 99.99% of what they were charging. And so that, in theory, that will drive prices down over time. So that's pretty neat. So it's the first time that we've ever had this capability. And so over time, it makes sense that merchants will want to use this. And if people see that it drives prices down, it makes sense that there'll be a demand on that side too. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a new technology. It's going to take time. But it's revolutionary in the sense that there's digital scarcity. There's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin. So it's scarcer. The strength of gold is a scarce asset. It accomplishes. And I've talked in other videos about the way it accomplishes it, but it accomplishes it. Nobody can double spend it, solve that problem, and it's got only 21 million will ever be in existence. Then, built on top of that is a payment rail system that is as easy to transact with as a debit or credit card. So you don't have to spend enormous amounts of energy transporting it. You still have to spend energy mining it because it was set up that way. It's the only way that they could ensure digital scarcity. And that is the value of proof of work. That's a video for another day. I have some of those videos. You can go back and watch them. But it's easy to transact with digitally, as easy as using a credit card. In fact, easier. You don't even need the card. You can use your phone and a QR code and send it. And it's instantaneous and it's nearly free. The cost is significantly lower, I should say, than Discover, Visa, MasterCard, or American Express charge. Significantly lower than Western Union or SWIFT for nations charge. So it is arguably a better form of money. It's 100% scarcity with a known issuance policy and a known amount of the total that will ever be in existence. It's easy to send it from one person to another or from one person to a merchant. And it's cheaper. And so that's it. That's all it is. Forget about the price of the Bitcoin and focus on the fact that as a monetary network, it's the best version, arguably, that the world has ever seen. And so what usually happens, or what has happened every time in the past, is when a better form of money comes along, eventually it takes over. Gold's going to take over shells. Paper gold takes over gold, right? Debit and credit cards in a debt system take over cash because it's just easier to transact it with. This accomplishes all those things without the downfalls, without the requirement to trust a centralized group or individual or government to not issue more or not just decide one day that, hey, we need to print some more or we need to destroy some. No, it's just set and this is how it's going to be. So I hope this video helped you understand a little bit more about the concept of why Bitcoin as a monetary network is such a powerful tool and why it is, in my opinion, has a very good chance long-term of, it's got staying power and it's got some real benefits that it can offer all of us. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed this. I'll be back.